Welcome to my little corner of the internet. Come in, sit down, get comfortable. Unless you're a Nazi, in which case, keep standing. We don't have enough chairs for you. So we've all been fed the same little fairy tale from the time we were in diapers. Starting as children, we're told the same stories where there are clear good guys and clear bad guys, and that there's rarely a gray area in between. A Vegeta, if you will. And the good guys should always prevail in the end. You start to realize that the world isn't a Disney movie. Sometimes the good guys do things that make you want to wash your brain with steel wool. One such example of this is the United States government's treatment of the Nazis post-World War II. And the reality is that everything produced from Nazi ideology wasn't destroyed after the war. It was just stripped of its symbols and repackaged as expertise and absorbed by institutions that found it useful. We didn't destroy the bad guy. We just gave them a new haircut, a new suit, and a job in human resources. So today we're looking at how the US government recycled the Reich into our medicine, our technology, even our school systems. Let's get into it. When the Holocaust is discussed in various classrooms, documentaries, and such, I noticed that it tends to start with Hitler and the aftermath of World War I. And it goes straight into rounding up the Jewish population, concentration camps, the genocide, the final solution. And these, of course, are crucial parts to the history, but believe it or not, before the Holocaust, the Nazis designed and executed a horrific prototype of what was to come, and it is known as Aktion T4, or the T4 program. The T4 program was a Nazi euthanasia program, which is one hell of a title. It targeted people with disabilities, people who were neurodivergent, who were institutionalized at some point for mental health conditions. And back then, a mental condition could simply be a woman telling her husband, you know what? I don't want to wear a skirt today. I think I'll start wearing pants for a little bit. The T4 program spanned from 1939 until the very end of World War II in 1945. And historians put the death toll in the hundreds of thousands, and more specific estimates land around 200,000 to 250,000 or higher, depending on how you count the decentralized killings that continued through the war. And FYI, many of the victims of this program were children. And I'm going to take a very brief moment to describe the ideology behind the program. Get ready to go down batshit alley. The Nazis were obsessed with racial hygiene, and they leaned on what is called eugenics, which is basically the idea that you can improve humanity by controlling reproduction and removing undesirable people. It's pseudoscience rolled in a petri dish of prejudice. Nazi eugenicists believed that there were people whose lives were unworthy of living, and that they posed a threat to greater German society. If you had a mental illness like schizophrenia, you would be considered part of that undesirable population. If you were hearing impaired, blind, had epilepsy, had a learning disability, you fell within this population. So in Nazi logic, people who had a disability, whether it be mental or physical, were framed as genetically defective, socially useless, and financially expensive. Now here's where T4 becomes the prototype for everything that follows. T4 did not run on chaos. It was a well-oiled machine. It ran on paperwork. Questionnaires were sent to hospitals, psychiatric institutions, and nursing homes. Staff would fill them out, and doctors reviewed them. This all sounds like super official medical shit. And they did this not because they wanted to treat people, but because they wanted to sort them. Patients were transported in buses under very friendly, comforting names like community transport or charitable ambulances. And then they would arrive at killing centers that looked like just normal medical facilities. And one of the main murder methods that they used at these sites was gassing. How is that? I don't know what's worse, the act itself, which is of course horrific, okay? But like the deception, the way that it was so organized and deceitful, it's so bad, it's so evil. At the program's Hartheim Euthanasia Center, they realized that shooting people was just too loud. So to remedy this issue, they built experimental gas chambers disguised as bathrooms. And if you know anything about the Holocaust and the concentration camps and all that, this should sound pretty familiar to you. They literally sat there with stopwatches and timed how long it took for children to die. Just imagine these children standing there, staring at the shower head, waiting for a shower. They think they're being cleaned. I get in my feels a lot with these kind of topics. I can't help but empathize with these victims. It's just horrific. So anyway, this is where the shower lie was born. During the Holocaust, victims that were transported to extermination camps like Auschwitz were told they were going to be disinfected in showers, but they were really being ushered into gas chambers. And the T4 program allowed Nazis to experiment and find creative ways to murder in mass, efficiently, cleanly, and quietly. And this approach also affected how killing felt to the people doing the killing. Because think about it, by turning murder into paperwork, schedules, procedures, responsibility was spread so thin that no single person had to feel fully responsible. No one person was pulling the trigger. Within just hours of arriving, victims were murdered in mass by a gas chamber. They were ushered into a room that looked like a large group shower room, and then carbon monoxide was fed into the room. Then the victims' remains were burned in a crematorium, which was located adjacent to the gassing site. And what's also really disgusting is how deeply the program was wrapped in legitimacy. From the outside looking in, it didn't look nefarious. They had the white lab coats, they used medical terminology and language, they had official letters, they trained personnel, normalized their procedures, and it proved that the state could kill at scale as long as they had the right euphemisms and enough filing cabinets. They even provided the loved ones of their victims with death certificates, and the death certificates would have some bullshit cause of death on them. Something they just pull right out of their asses. Obviously, we know that the Nazis lost the war. That is without question. But what we should question is what happened to the people who were involved with the T4 program. The people who made it possible. Many of them just went back to work, dusted off the old briefcase, and it was business as usual. So let's talk about one of the nastiest examples of this. Heinrich Gross. That name is so fitting. I just realized that. That's so funny. Heinrich Gross was a psychiatrist and neurologist who was involved in Spiegelgrund, the children's clinic in Vienna that was tied to Nazi euthanasia crimes. Allegations included murdering children and keeping their brains for medical study. The Guardian reported on the case in 1999 when he was charged after investigations. This man had no issue with participating in the T4 program. Zero. No hesitation, no moral crisis. No sleepless nights that we know of, at least. And you may be asking, how was this man able to live his best life up to this point? At the end of the war, Heinrich Gross was captured by the Soviet Union. He spent about 2 years in custody, then he was released and sent back to Austria. He was then put on trial for the murder of these children. And the trial went like this. He got 2 years for accessory to manslaughter. I wish I had a gavel. What do I got? I got some whiteboard spray. Objection. Objection. And what's crazy is that 2-year sentence didn't even stick. His conviction was overturned so fast, he didn't even have time to get comfortable in prison. Probably didn't even have enough time to enjoy the delectable meals that prison has to offer, or send his first kite message to a fellow prisoner. Depending on the source, he may have served roughly a month, possibly less, probably less. Long enough to be mildly inconvenienced. Then he went back to work. And when I say he went back to work, what I mean is that he went on to have a successful career in Austria in the medical field. And he became a well-known, well-respected psychiatrist. I don't even have the wherewithal to object. He won awards. Yeah. He was respected. He served as a court-appointed expert. This is a man that the legal system trusted to evaluate the mental health of others. This is the same man who kept jars of children's brains in formaldehyde. The same children he helped murder. The same children whose deaths were quietly signed off as medical. Just medical shit happened, bro. But his past did not stay buried forever. It resurfaced in the mid-1970s. So people knew. They knew. It was documented, it was discussed, and he still kept practicing after that point. And there are even credible claims that he continued using the preserved brains of the murdered children for so-called research. Years later, years down the line. So no, this wasn't ignorance on the state's part or whatever medical institutions that he was involved in. This wasn't a clerical error. This was a system looking at a man like Heinrich Gross and saying, yeah, but he's useful though. He's useful. So the reason why I wanted to start this video off talking about the T4 program, even though it's unrelated to the US's recruitment of Nazi war criminals, is because I think it paints a perfect picture of the type of horrendous shit that these guys were doing during the Holocaust and how nuts it is that countries like the US and Austria were willing to disregard that shit altogether. So now we pivot from silent reintegration to active recruitment of Nazis. Operation Paperclip. And if you don't know what Operation Paperclip was, I will provide the briefest synopsis. After World War II, the US wanted German expertise. They wanted that knowledge, especially rocket science stuff, weapons, and military research. The Cold War was kicking off and the Soviets were the new big bad. So instead of just prosecuting Nazi scientists, the US recruited many of them. The US was super impressed with what the Nazis were able to accomplish, tech-wise, medicine, all of it. But then the US was like, let's just disregard the fact that all of these advancements were made possible by the countless lives and families that were destroyed in the process. So the National Archives declassified record guidance describing personnel dossiers on over 1,500 foreign scientists and engineers brought to the US under Project Paperclip and related programs. And here's what gets me. Some people cling to this idea that the US government only brought over the good Nazis, the apolitical geniuses who were just trying to build rockets and advance their careers. They didn't want to be involved with killing a bunch of people. That distinction is a level of insanity that I don't even want to cross. Even some sources discussing Paperclip openly noted that some recruits were confirmed former Nazi party members, including from SS and SA divisions. One such piece of shit that the US brought over was Wernher von Braun. Von Braun was a Nazi scientist who became a leader at NASA. He became the director of the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center starting in 1960 and remained with NASA until his resignation in 1972. He was one of the most, if not the most, important leader in the US space program during the 1960s. He worked on the V-2 rocket program, which relied on forced labor tied to the Mittelbau-Dora system, which was a massive Nazi concentration camp where huge numbers of prisoners died. It was his expertise and involvement in creating the Saturn V rocket that greatly contributed to the Apollo 11 mission and the US reaching the moon. Winning the space race was so important to the US government that they were willing to overlook that tiny little blemish on the background section of his employment questionnaire. I can't help but think, as a millennial in 2026, how difficult it is to find a job these days, and these were getting hired left and right. The US didn't stop at rocket scientists. They were all in on Nazi recruitment. They also brought over Nazi doctors, and one of them was Hubertus Strughold. I wonder what a nickname would be like for someone named Hubertus. I don't know why I keep saying it. Hubertus. Hey, Hubes. Hubes was a physician tied to the Luftwaffe's medical research programs. During World War II, he served as chief of aeromedical research under Hermann Göring's Ministry of Aviation, and later for the Luftwaffe, Nazi Germany's Air Force, beginning around 1935. Just knowing that he worked under the likes of Hermann Göring is literally all I need to know. Hubes' work focused on understanding how extreme conditions like high altitude, pressure changes, speed, and other stresses affect the human body. Which, if you're wondering, none of this are things that you can ethically test on a human subject. Dachau concentration camp became the primary site for Nazi aviation medicine experiments. Prisoners were shoved into low-pressure chambers to simulate extreme altitudes. Their lungs would rupture and they would convulse. Just horrific shit. Others were submerged in ice water or left naked outside in freezing conditions until their body temperature plummeted. Then doctors tested different rewarming techniques to see which ones worked best. All around horrific shit. Many people died from these experiments. The research data from these horrific forced experiments didn't just sit in a drawer. It made its way to the aeromedical research that Hubes helped run. His institute participated in medical experimentation under Nazi rule, including research involving human subjects that caused suffering and death. That means he knew, he benefited, he kept working. After the end of the war, Hubes came to the US under Operation Paperclip, worked for the Air Force and closely with NASA. He became known as the father of space and medicine. That's one hell of a pipeline, y'all. The then Space Medicine Association even created an award named after him, until it just quietly vanished one day. It actually, if you look at Hubes' Wikipedia page, there's a section where it lists all the awards recipients throughout the years. It starts in the 1960s and then it just abruptly stops after 2012. And look, the point of this video isn't to create a blanket statement that NASA or the US government is evil. I'll leave that fight for the comments section. Please leave comments, by the way. It helps soothe the algorithm. The point of this video is that the US government was willing to reclassify people as assets instead of criminals when it served national goals. There have been modern deportations of elderly former Nazis and collaborators who entered the US by hiding their wartime roles. Not because the US just suddenly discovered morality, but because eventually someone's file gets reopened. The beans are dropped or whatever the hell it's called, and they are no longer valuable enough to protect. I really said the beans get dropped. Spelled. The beans get spelled. And I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like we all haven't benefited from Nazi advancements as a society. This video just barely scratches the surface in that respect. And honestly, I think it'd be a good idea to create a video that specifically focuses on the advancements in tech and medicine that was developed by Nazis that we are using today. But all that aside, benefiting from something does not erase where these advancements came from and how horrific its origins are. Progress does not erase provenance, because the uncomfortable truth is that these advancements were built on innocent lives that never got justice. Disabled children were killed in hospitals, frozen, suffocated, and mutilated in camps, and the data that was recorded from their deaths was recycled and reused. And it's up, and that should not be overlooked or forgotten. And the perpetrators' actions should not be excused, regardless of what advancements came from the horrific shit that they did. Alright guys, that was enough history for one day. Thank you so much for watching. Like, subscribe, do whatever makes the algorithm feel real loved inside. See you in the next one.